Can your computer be hacked? I know this is a question that a lot of people always, ask. They always have this question, and understandably so, right? So what I wanted to present to you guys here today is two different cases. Can your computer be hacked? Because it's a little bit more complicated than it might seem on the surface. So I'm going to break this down into two categories here. So you have, can it be hacked locally and can it be hacked remotely? So a lot of us, in the security space, probably when we're thinking of a computer being hacked, we're thinking of probably remote cases. Maybe the user downloads some kind of ransomware, malware, something like that, a virus on their computer, if you will. They run that, and then the attacker gets remote access to their system, or maybe gets some of their credentials, things like that. That is one scenario. The other scenario is the local scenario, right? Maybe a hacker has a virus on a USB, right? Maybe they, probably if they have any level of competency, they've ensured that virus will be able to bypass antivirus or any of those common protections you would see on a system. So when they plug up, they can actually get code execution, maybe install a keylogger. There's an infinite amount of things they could do, right? So let's start with that local scenario. So the first thing they could do is, there could be some shoulder surfing involved, right? If you're working maybe in a public space or something, someone can look over your shoulder and see you type stuff in. And, to a lot of people that are not in this space, they're probably like, well, that's not a hack. That's not a real attack. But these are things that are very, possible. And, the easier method you can find to, find a way in, by all means, do that every time, right? There's really no reason to, use crazy 0-day vulnerabilities when you could get in a very simple manner like that, right? Just, someone's shoulder surfing or something like that, right? So that is one way. But, let's focus on the computer, right? The computer itself being hacked. Well, another scenario in the local sense that an attacker can do is they could do something like just plugging straight into your computer with a USB. Now, one thing you got to remember, I got a Windows system in front of me right here and now. So let me just open like a random folder to something on the File Explorer. So one thing is, the way Windows works is all the files and folders have different permissions assigned to them. So everything on my Windows system here, it has, privileges that tell my account, say whether my account can, for example, create a file in the folder, modify a file, delete a file, rename. So, different things like that. There's permissions. They're called ACLs or ACLs. And that is a system that's very specific to Windows and how Windows handles file permissions, right? So, for example, things in my Windows System 32 folder are going to be locked down, right? Like a regular user is not going to be able to modify things like, say, turn my sticky keys into spawning the command prompt, which was a privilege escalation technique I did back in the day. I won't get into that one now, but maybe some of you guys know of that one. Let me know in the comments section down below. But yeah, so all of these obviously are critical for the system to run as intended, all these DLLs and executables, and you wouldn't want that stuff to get tampered with. So it's locked down by ACLs to make sure that only the administrators, or maybe even system in some cases, are the only accounts that can mess with those files. Now, the thing is, if I have an instance of Linux on a bootable thumb drive, USB drive, right? If I have physical access to someone's computer, I could simply just slot that in the thumb drive, and I can access all these files. And because I'm running it, I'm running a bootable Linux version, right? I can see all these files on their system because the files are just files on a hard drive. That's all. And because I'm running in the context of Linux, it doesn't know anything about Windows file permissions, right? Because, like I said, the The ACLs and all that, that is specific to Windows. So if I am accessing these files via Linux, then none of those rules apply to me. I can do anything I want with any file. So therefore, it's pretty easy from there to compromise the system or even, tamper with the system in any way. I can create any file anywhere. I can grab any file from anywhere. I can modify any file anywhere. So really, if someone has physical access to your computer, you should make peace with the fact that, hey, if there's someone you don't trust, they're probably, they could hack you if they wanted to, right? If they really wanted to, they could. So that's something to keep in mind. If you don't trust them, then make sure they don't have physical access to your machine in any capacity. Now, going to the remote side, right? What we can talk about, with the antivirus bypassing, I'll save that for another video because that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, when we're talking about the remote side of the house, so things like, scenarios like I mentioned before, right? You get a virus on your computer, or maybe even you're just running a vulnerable piece of software. How can you know? How can you tell? Well, here is where the actionable advice in this video comes into play. So this right here, your machine, your system, maybe it's a server, maybe it's just your laptop that you use to work every day, or your desktop that you use. Know what services you're running on your system. And what I mean by that is, for most people, for most end users, they're not really going to have to worry about this. But if you are using your machine for a little bit more than just, the everyday use, like maybe you're hosting a web server on there. Maybe you're hosting some kind of file share, FTP, or whatever the case may be, right? Maybe you're running some kind of software on it that connects out to the network or allows people to connect to it from various places on the network. Especially in that scenario, you're going to want to make sure that those versions of those software are not vulnerable. And even if you have... And I'll extend this a bit, right? Even if you have, going back for a second to the local scenario, even if you have some software on your machine that might be from, let's say, 2014, God forbid, or 2018 or 2019, years ago, it could even be from last year or this year. If it's not up to date, right? And this is why it's so important to keep your software up to date. If you have software that even if it's not connected out to the network or anything, but you haven't updated in a while, it might be vulnerable to a code execution type of vulnerability. And then at that point, if anyone even got on your system with user privileges, maybe they could exploit that to become root on your system. Or essentially, for you guys that are newer to this, what I'm saying is that if you have a vulnerable piece of software that's not even connecting out to the network, right, on your machine, if someone gets access to your machine just as your user account or whatever, they might be able to exploit that in order to gain higher levels of privilege on your machine to be able to do even more on your machine. Not only that, maybe they can use it in a targeted attack against you. If they know that you have a particular vulnerable piece of software on your computer, they can craft an exploit for that. Bundle it as a Trojan, make it look like something legitimate, like a file that you were expecting from another person, for example, send it to you. You think it's something else. You click on it, you run it on your system, and now all of a sudden they have remote access to your system as well, depending on the nuances of what the vulnerability is. So in these cases, right, in all these cases, on the local software that you have, or even the software that's connected out to the network, how can you be sure that that's not hackable? Well, for one thing, you can't be completely and totally sure, right? Because even if you look out there on the internet for exploits, you got to keep in mind these are known exploits. There's tons and tons of exploits out there, vulnerabilities out there that are not known, but maybe in certain circles, like, the dark web and stuff like that, maybe they're being sold out there as 0-day vulnerabilities, or maybe they're not even on the dark web, but, there's certain hacking groups, advanced persistent threats, right? APT actors out there. Believe me, they have a lot of 0 days that they utilize that you and me don't know about, right? So with that being said, you cannot be 100% sure, but if you were to do the most due diligence, how would you go about doing it? Well, first of all, I picked a really bad system to show this because this is my malware analysis VM and it's not connected to the internet. So let me just fire up a web browser and I'll show you guys how I would go about looking for this. So essentially what it comes down to is that you want to take to a site called ExploitDB. So if I just Google ExploitDB, I see the exploit database. And I've covered this on some videos before on this channel. But basically, this is a database of all the known, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of the known exploits out there, right? And they're always adding more. You see, there's a few added, a few days ago here. And yeah, this is one of the most recent ones. This is huge, this policy kit privilege escalation on Linux. So usually what you have here is you'll even get the exploit, right? I mean, it's all about exploits, right? So here is the actual exploit to exploit this vulnerability. And in this case, get a root shell on a Linux server. Now, in some cases, you might even be able to download it. So we can here. So basically when it says download, it allows you to download the vulnerable version of the software. For you guys, unless you're doing this in your testing lab, there's really no reason to. But that being said, if you are trying to get experience with a vulnerability and you have the option to download into your lab, I would definitely recommend doing that on the site. But that's not the point that we're here. The real point that we are on the site is that, let's say that we are running an FTP server, just for the sake of example here, and we're running VSFTPD version 2.034, I believe, right? So if we say VSFTPD, we can search that, right? Or yeah, version 234, let's just say, right? So we're running this, or like you want to put in like your, preferably if it has a, if you know the version, put that in. If you don't, you can just Google how to find the version of the software that you're running and just search it in here and see what comes up. In this case, this would be a really bad thing, right? It's vulnerable to backdoor command execution. And pretty much you can stop there. You don't really need to look at the exploit. If you want to test it out in your lab, you can. And if you want to, if anything, I would say if you want to look at the exploit, do so to get a feel for how easy it would be for an attacker, for a script kiddie to exploit you, right? Something like this is very friendly for a script kiddie to just fire this off, and especially when you see this Metasploit here, right? That's how you really know it's easy for the script kiddie to exploit you. And why is this important? It's important because it puts you at greater risk, because now you have a larger attack surface, right? You don't have to, the attacker doesn't have to be particularly skilled in order to exploit your system. So this is something I would definitely do. I even did this for a few friends, and I noticed they're running a particular old version of some software. I just looked it up in here. In some cases, I found code execution type vulnerabilities, and I let them know, like, hey, you might want to update that. So yeah, this is how I would recommend going about finding out if you're vulnerable or not. Let me know if there's any questions down in the comment section below, and I will get them addressed for you. And if it warrants another video, then I will do that as well. Yeah, thanks for watching. If you want to get into the technical content to actually exploit this stuff, I have that on screen for you right now, and I'll see you over in those videos. Thanks for watching.